This is Matthew Kratter's Bitcoin University. Today I want to talk about Michael Saylor talking about Bitcoin knots and the whole op return crisis. And we'll be looking at this video from BTC Prague. So let's get started.
So I think protocol proposals, however well-intentioned, can go horribly wrong. And I think that the late debate, this debate we see right now over op return limits, this is actually a second order or maybe even a third order change. It's not it's not changing the amount of Bitcoin, which of course is an atomic zero order change. It's not changing the block side, which is the first order change. It's somewhere in the second and a half to third order. But the reaction of the community, which is, to reject it, an inflammatory reaction, I thought was a healthy response. It's healthy to be skeptical of a third order change to the protocol.
Now, the immune response he's obviously talking about is so many people switching to Bitcoin knots and embracing it. And as I'm making this video, Bitcoin knots is currently about 20% of the network. I wanted to address a couple of his comments right there. I don't think it's completely accurate to view changes to mempool policy, like the op return debate, as a second or third order change. I think they're much more fundamental than that, because mempool policy software default settings, which most people will use out of the box, these determine what most Bitcoin transactions on the network will look like both before and after they get mined. You can always bypass the defaults if you really want to, but most people don't and won't. And if those defaults keep non-monetary data to a minimum, it sends a clear message to the world that Bitcoin is focused on being money. But if those defaults welcome the relay of large non-monetary transactions, like 100,000 byte op returns, it sends a completely different message to the world, and especially a completely different message to bad actors who may view this as an invitation to use the Bitcoin network to help to circulate illicit material and other bad things. Since the days of Satoshi himself, it's been generally understood that Bitcoin is a monetary network. However, over the past few years, there's been a small but growing contingent of people, mostly crypto VC and dev adjacent, whose startup investments require them to convince people that Bitcoin is actually a multi-purpose data agnostic platform that can be used for relaying and storing non-monetary data. This cultural shift, I think, is behind Bitcoin Core's weak response to the inscriptions exploit a few years ago, as well as their current desire to destroy a conservative mempool policy that has been working well for over a decade. As Mechanic points out here, you've been filtering, this is what Bitcoin Core has been saying to us, quote, in essentially the summary, you've been filtering arbitrary data out of your mempool for 15 years. Here's why that's suddenly dangerous. You need to stop. And as I point out in this video, which I'll link to in the description notes below, Bitcoin culture has always been anti-spam until recently. If you're finding this video interesting, I'll pause just really briefly here to ask you to help to support this channel. Hit the subscribe button, that does really help. Leave a like, leave a comment, question, suggestion for a future video. Share this video with a friend or family member. In 2014, Bitcoin Core dev culture was focused on limiting non-monetary data on Bitcoin, and it was this community and dev hostility that ultimately drove away Vitalik Buterin and led him to build the horrific bloated monstrosity that is Ethereum. So that was Bitcoin Core dev culture in 2014, being very anti-non-monetary data and anti-arbitrary data. By contrast, in 2025, Bitcoin Core dev culture is focused on mempool block harmonization, forcing node runners to relay whatever miners decide they want to be putting into blocks. And this really represents a huge shift in Bitcoin Core dev culture and is distinct from the minutia of the technical debate that we're currently experiencing. If you start putting issues like mempool fee estimation and block propagation ahead of first principles like Bitcoin as a monetary network, you've completely lost the forest for the trees, as Bitcoin Core devs and their supporters have repeatedly shown us in the past few months of debate. This is also a complete inversion of the actual hierarchy, which is that the miners work for the nodes and not the other way around. So to respond to Saylor's point about first, second, and third order effects, or first, second, and third order scarcity, I would argue that mempool policy, rather than being a second or third order issue, may actually both reflect and determine a social consensus that is just as fundamental as on-chain consensus rules, and that messing with mempool policy may lead to things that are just as catastrophic as those that could be introduced with a change to consensus rules like a soft fork. And I think that's one reason some people aren't taking this debate as seriously as they should be. I'm not saying that Michael's doing that, but some other people are, because they think it's not a consensus, or soft fork crisis is just mempool policy. But I think mempool policy, as it reflects and shapes culture, is extremely, extremely important. So let's listen to what Michael has to say next.
And it might be, and if it's a first order change, it puts everything at risk. And the biggest danger is a very talented, well-funded, well-intentioned developer trying to do something good. That's the danger, right? And that is fundamentally the issue, which is a very competent, well-funded, well-intentioned developer that wants to upgrade the protocol. That is the risk. The risk is, I've said this tongue-in-cheek before.
And I think that's true, but I think the risk also comes from less competent programmers and devs who also want to update the protocol. And let's finish with another quote that got quite a bit of coverage.
If I wanted to destroy Bitcoin, I would just fund infinite developers who are very talented and tell them to make it better.
That was the quote that got a lot of people triggered, and not surprisingly, the same guy who added support for Ethereum at his own company, namely Casa, and who invests in companies that want to make Bitcoin more like Ethereum, this same guy is pretty upset with Saylor for saying something that I think is quite reasonable and is within Bitcoin culture, as Jameson Lopp points out here, basically mocking Saylor. If I wanted to stifle Bitcoin cost stagnation and prevent it from reaching its full potential, I try to convince folks that its most skilled developers are actually a threat. And this is, again, coming from a guy who shows strong support for Ethereum, so he doesn't really have the moral high ground here. But I do think that Michael Saylor clearly gets it, and it's very exciting to see him weigh in on this debate. Bitcoin is a $2 trillion asset that is essential for the survival and flourishing of humanity. It's not some sandbox for 20-something devs to play around in. If they want to do that, go over to Ethereum or Cardano or Solana or something like that. And if you don't come to Bitcoin with a certain measure of humility and perspective, you simply cannot be a good steward of the Bitcoin network. And I would maintain that at least the lead core maintainers, the way they behaved in public, the more public-facing ones, have definitely shown the world that they cannot be a good steward of the Bitcoin network. Jimmy Song echoes the point here.
What I am concerned about is the process, which currently is, hey, we're the developers, and we're going to, even though there's a whole bunch of people in the community that don't like this change, we're going to go ahead with it anyway. And there have been several sort of like justifications for that. One is, hey, if you don't like it, just go run some other client. And then as soon as you start running another client, hey, that client is so stupid, you shouldn't run it, right? Like that's, yeah, it's like kind of talking out of both sides of their mouth. And that's to me like a very fiat political tactic of, hey, if you don't like it, then don't do it. But not like that, right? Like it's just kind of closing off all doors because we're the technical experts. It's which is, basically how they push the vax, among other things.
I thought that was a great summary as well. So it's good to hear Jimmy Song and Michael Saylor weighing in on these issues. They're definitely deep thinkers on matters like this. And so I think this gives us further hope. If you're not running knots, you should be. I'll be putting some links in the description notes below. They'll teach you how to run a Bitcoin knots node and help to support the network. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the subscribe and like buttons. Hit the notification bell if you want to be notified when I publish my next video. And let me know your questions and comments in the comment section below. Thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.